Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. While the world is racing against time, trying to score a win against COVID-19, the Boko Haram terrorism is alive and rife in Western Africa. On Wednesday, Boko Haram killed at least 92 soldiers and officers of Chad military. On Tuesday, Boko Haram killed nearly 50 Nigerian military soldiers. The Nigerian military claims that it killed 200 Boko Haram terrorists in a cleanup and consolidation operation in the group's enclave in the Borno province. Boko Haram has been operating in northeastern Nigeria, Niger, Chad, Mali, and Cameroon since 2002, when the group was founded by Muhammad Yusuf. While Yusuf was captured and then killed by the Nigerian police in the 2009 Boko Haram uprising, the group expanded its terrorist activities, and its area of operations now includes states contiguous with Nigeria. According to several estimates, over 50,000 people have been killed and nearly 3 million displaced because of Boko Haram activities and military operations by a joint multinational force of states hit by Boko Haram terrorism. Amnesty and independent reports have also criticized the Nigerian military for human rights violations and raping women previously held by Boko Haram fighters. To discuss the situation further, we are joined by Mr. Bukarti, who is an analyst, joins us from London, and Mr. Abdullah Murtala, who is a journalist, reporter, and researcher, joins us from Nigeria. Thank you to both panelists. This is not new, obviously. Mr. Bukarti, the Boko Haram activities have been going on for a long time. Is there something significant about this particular attack? Because it is claimed that it seems to be the deadliest so far.
Yeah, so your recap was an excellent recap of the last 10 years. And you are right that this is not something new. But what makes it new is the scale of the attack. Like you said, 92 Chadian soldiers were killed this week, while about 47, according to Nigerian figures, were killed in Nigeria. And both of these are the most spectacular attacks, if you like, the deadliest attack in both Nigeria and Chad since Boko Haram's uprising started. But I don't mean deadliest in terms of civilian fatalities. It is the deadliest in terms of security fatalities, especially when you have the country's own security forces admitting these big numbers.
Correct. So, give me a sense of, is this a mixed bag? How much has the multinational force and also the Nigerian military been able to clean up and consolidate?
So, the Nigerian military has been fighting Boko Haram now for 10 years, and the multinational joint task force has now been fighting Boko Haram for about 5 years, because the task force was reinvigorated in 2015. And they have always said they are clearing Boko Haram. They have always said they are winning the war against Boko Haram. But attacks like the most recent ones remind us that Boko Haram remains a very potent and eminent threat across the Lake Chad region. And I think it might be true that the military is succeeding in the battle against Boko Haram in some ways. But these recent attacks and Boko Haram's resilience over the past 10 years tells you the ineffectiveness or inadequacy of a securitized approach to the crisis. What we have done in the last 10 years is focusing mainly on military or security approach to the crisis. And the recent events tell us that this cannot bring an end to this nightmare. We have got to approach the issue from all angles. And one of them is to ensure that supplies to the group has stopped. And when I say supply, I mean supply of arms and equipment, but also supply of fighters. Boko Haram fighters are being killed for the last 10 years, but they have always had fighters. Why is that so? That's because Boko Haram has been able to continue to recruit and conscript fighters from amongst the communities. And my analogy for fighting terrorism is like evacuating an overflowing bath. When your toilet bath overflows, I think the first thing you should do is to stop the tap from running. That is, stop the supply. And the way you stop the supply in the communities is ensuring that communities are immune against Boko Haram recruitment. Across the Lake Chad region, there are millions of young people, most of whom are Muslims. They love Islam and hold it dear to their chest, but they are ignorant of Islam. Boko Haram exploits their love for Islam and their ignorance of the religion to recruit them by oversimplifying and exploiting some elements of Islamic teachings. And I think if we want to stop Boko Haram, the first thing is to stop their supply of fighters. That's by working with communities to immunize youth through counter-narratives and alternative narrative programs, but also continue the military efforts. So what I am saying is the securitized approach hasn't been so effective, but it should continue. But then soft approaches such as counter and alternative narrative intended to dismantle Boko Haram's ideology must be put in place and be systematically implemented in order to stop youth from joining the group.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with almost everything you've said, because as you know, we had to fight for almost 18 years homegrown, terrorist groups in what used to be the federally administered tribal areas. But let me go to Mr. Murtala here. Mr. Murtala, since you report and obviously you keep an eye on the situation, some of the points that Mr. Bukarti has raised are very important. One is, where are the supplies coming from? One, arms and ammunition, and of course the fact that they can recruit. And as far as the recruitment is concerned, that has to do with, as per Mr. Bukarti, that there are not really any viable counter-narrative programs. It's an approach towards going and killing as many of the Boko Haram fighters as possible, but they keep coming. So give me a sense of what your reading of the situation is.
The Nigerian military has won several battles against Boko Haram. However, the war is still far from being over. And like Mr. Bukarti said, a multidimensional effort is required, both military effort, security effort. However, developmental effort and also countering violent extremism and preventing violent extremism is important. A lot of people join either based on ideological factors, which Mr. Bulama has highlighted by saying, because of the love with Islam that we have, a lot of people have in these areas, it's been exploited by Boko Haram. However, there are also other issues like social and economic reasons. People tend to who do not have livelihoods. Are also this underlying factor is also being exploited by these groups. And so, as Mr. Bulama has said, Nigeria needs a multidimensional effort. One, to combat Boko Haram in terms of addressing the problem itself and also the symptoms of the problem, the socio-economic factors and also the ideological factors. The Nigerian military has for 10 years been fighting Boko Haram. They suffered several losses. In 2020, the incident on Monday was the worst. For the Chadians, the incident on Monday was the worst for them ever since they joined the war in 2015. So it shows us that we are far from winning the war, and investment that is required in both military and soft approach is needed now, and we do not have to delay it. There is also been foreign assistance in terms of both training and equipment to the military in both Nigeria and the Multinational Joint Task Force. We know that the Nigerian military also sent people to Pakistan for training based on the experience from the Pakistani army. And in terms of cutting the logistics and supplies to Boko Haram, as one, you have to stop the fact that to prevent them from having recruits getting new fighters, and so for you to stop them from having new fighters, you have to stop the social reasons why people end up joining the group. You have to revamp rural communities, because a lot of
that's also the point. That's also the point that that Mr. Bukarti raised. Let me go back to Mr. Bukarti. About Mr. Bukarti, what we've seen for some time now is that Boko Haram has been operating in the Lake Chad area, which is a marshy area, and so you have Chad, Niger, Nigeria, Cameroon borders kind of, contiguous. I mean, this is an area that is approached, that is contiguous to, four states at least, as per the map. Now, since there is a multinational task force. Purely militarily speaking, it should be relatively easier to try and hem them in and then go in for the kill.
Yeah, I mean, on the face of it, it should be simple, but it's not that simple. Like you said, Boko Haram operates in a border region that brings together 4 different countries. But that's not only the issue. You also have issue with the area it operates. It is a forest, which gives them the opportunity to hide and launch attacks. But then there are issues of porous border or border insecurity. There are issues of the geography. I just spoke about the place being a forest, a vast forest that is very difficult to monitor and ensure it is well policed. And then you have issues of ineffective governance. You have issues of corruption and all stuff like that. And like
let me interject here, Mr. Bukarti. That's a very interesting point. How much of this factor that you're talking about, corruption and ineffective governance, got to do with this deteriorating situation with reference to Boko Haram?
No, this is a very important factor when it comes to Boko Haram. So, for example, in 2015, $2.1 billion were budgeted to fight Boko Haram in Nigeria. But not a single cent was used to buy arms to fight Boko Haram. All the money was diverted to political campaigns, and it was chaired by the then ruling party, and there are now people in court being charged for offenses dealing with diverting that money. In fact, one of them had been convicted about a month ago. And so corruption plays a big role, and this corruption has to do with the capitals in the national countries, but also with commanders fighting on ground and humanitarian organizations and agencies. And if soldiers don't have enough weapons and equipment, whether they are communication or intelligence equipment, to fight a particular phenomenon, Boko Haram in this case, they can't succeed however good those soldiers might be, because you can't fight.
Okay. Let's hold on to that. Let me go to Mr. Murtala here. Mr. Murtala, so corruption, poor governance, lack of equipment, lack of intelligence resources, etc., etc. And this is something, and we're talking about not just one state, we're talking about at least 4 states here. So how much of this is contributing? As per Mr. Bukarti, it is contributing a lot towards, negatively obviously, towards the fight, as far as Boko Haram is concerned. How do you look at this in terms of, your own investigations and your own reporting?
So I absolutely agree with Mr. Bulama. A lot of the underlying factors goes back to governance. Boko Haram the insurgency dates back to 2009. However, Boko Haram as a group dates back to 2002 or more. So what we found out is that a lot of the ill governance, social injustice played a role in the rise of the group and continues to play a role in sustaining the group. So also the ability of the military to sustain offensive is also affected by the nature of the political system and also corruption. As Mr. Bulama highlighted, in 2015, there was a lot of monies that were given for equipment. However, later on, we identified that these monies were not disbursed. Secondly, on the nature of equipment, soldiers need equipment to sustain offensive. However, they also need training. So if you have equipment and you do not have the right training, you get to lose this equipment. And from what we have noticed is the fact that for the past 2 to 3 years, a lot of military bases were raided and weapons looted. These weapons have also been used by these.
Yes, in fact, you're absolutely right. In fact, this recent raid on the Chadian military troops, they killed 92 and they looted lots of weapons held by the Chad military. But thank you so much. That was Abdullah Murtala speaking with us. Let me go back to Mr. Bukarti. Mr. Bukarti, one of the reasons, and this is of course a relatively new phenomenon, Boko Haram, but states in Africa, for the most part, have had to deal with political corruption, political rivalries, coups, poor governance. And given the kind of talent that there is in Africa, with so many brilliant writers, intellectuals, and how much do you think they could contribute towards ameliorating the situation, or do you think that it is so systemic that individuals don't particularly matter?
Yeah, you are right. Africa is endowed with both human and natural resources, and it is a continent that has no reason whatsoever to be poor. Unfortunately, our curse is leadership. We don't have the right kind of leadership that will establish systems and institutions that would deliver good governance and forestall terrorism and insecurity. I would say it's systemic. It is systemic in the sense that these crises and challenges are well entrenched in the institutions in almost all African countries. But that doesn't mean individuals cannot contribute effectively to taking Africa to the promised land. If you look at the history of all countries in the world, you would see that it only required an individual or two to take the mantle of leadership, take the bull by the horn, and take their countries to the promised land. And so I believe African intellectuals and professionals around the world have a big role to play in bringing Sanko to Africa and developing the continent in a way that groups like this would be defeated.
I agree, Mr. Bukarti, but here's the thing. This talent, this human resource that Africa has, and these are people who across the world are doing a wonderful, performing greatly whatever profession they are in. But once they are back, or once they get subsumed in the system back at home, the system doesn't really like them. I mean, it's a vicious kind of trap that they get into.
Yeah, I agree with you. The system doesn't like them. And that's because if you are fighting corruption, corruption will naturally fight you back. And nobody brings change because the system likes them. Everyone in the history of the world that has brought change was fought by the system. But they persevered and withstood, and that's what African intellectuals and professionals have got to do. We've got to ensure that we fight the system, but understand that there would be challenges along the way, and be braced up for the challenges that would come. And unless we do that, this continent would continue to wallow in poverty and diseases and crisis, and only God knows when that will stop. And if we don't stop it, then we might end up being consumed by the crisis that engulfing the continent today. If one says, I am out of the continent now, I am in Europe, I am in Asia, I am in other parts of the world that are doing well, we should remember that we have families back on the continent. And not only that, we must also remember that God created us on the continent for a reason, and that reason is for us to contribute our quota to the development of the continent. I strongly believe African intellectuals and professionals have a strong role to play, and I urge all of us who aren't doing their role the way they should to take up the challenge, take the bull by the horn, like I said, and contribute to their quota to the development of their continent, to defeating terrorism as we have today, and ensuring that the socio-economic issues and ideological issues driving terrorism are tackled in a way that future generations wouldn't have a cause to worry about the challenges we are worrying about today.
Absolutely. Stay with me, Mr. Bukarti. I'm also joined by Mr. MacHarry. Confidence, Ms. Confidence, thank you for being on the program. He's an analyst, joins me from Lagos in Nigeria. Ms. Confidence, we were talking about the various factors that hamper the effort against Boko Haram, which obviously is a major threat to Nigeria, to Niger, to Chad, to Cameroon. Give me your reading of the situation, especially, I mean, not just in relation to the recent attacks, but the phenomenon over a trajectory, starting the 2009 Boko Haram uprising.
All right. So as it is all known, the Boko Haram insurgency, for most people actually think it began in 2009. But it actually began way before 2009. They only took up arms against the Nigerian state in 2009. And since then, they've killed thousands of people.
Well, it was founded in 2002. It was founded in 2002 by Muhammad Yusuf. But I was like looking at 2009 as a watershed moment. I mean, they resorted to violence before that, but 2009 onwards, it has become far more pronounced.
Yeah, the group formation actually started in 2002. So they began as a religious group which only took up arms when the Nigerian leader of the group, that's Muhammad Yusuf, who also doubles as a founder, was killed in 2009 by Nigerian security forces. And so since 2009, they've launched various attacks that became cross-border in 2013. So we now see incursions into territories like Cameroon, Chad, Niger Republic. And so they are also joined, since the arrival of the Islamic State, they also have partnerships in the Sahel, which also has to include Mali, Burkina Faso, and some other countries in the Sahel. So as it stands now, Boko Haram has a wider influence than people actually like to think. And it's not just Boko Haram we are dealing with currently. Boko Haram currently has about two other factions that split from it. There's the Shekau-owned faction, which is actually known as JAS, and then there's also Ansaru, who operates in the northwestern and north-central zones of Nigeria. And then there is the Islamic State West Africa province, who is responsible for the death of the soldiers, the 92 soldiers that were killed some days ago in Niger. So this particular group operates in the Lake Chad region. And so the structural deficiencies that have made Boko Haram to progress the way it has in the last decade or so has more to do with bureaucracies, corruption within the Nigerian militia hierarchy, and lack of will by other partners in the multinational joint task force to actually do their part. Because quite a number of countries in the multinational joint task force took the fight against Boko Haram as a child's play. It wasn't until Boko Haram started attacking their own territories that they actually came together. Even at that, the alliance to fight the terrorists is not even as strong, because France is the center, is the pin that is holding this alliance together. And so if France actually does not do something, the likelihood for these leaders to collaborate to fight these insurgents, it's faltering. So on the Nigerian part, we have structural corruption, we have incompetence, and then the lack of political will to actually fight these insurgents. But then it's a lot more. It has a lot more to do with just more than just
Absolutely.
corruption.
That's a very important point, Mr. Confidence. Thank you for speaking with us. Before I wrap up this segment, let me hop back to Mr. Bukarti. Mr. Bukarti, talking about recruitment, the point that you raised earlier. Now, tell me, there obviously, as I said in my opening, a lot of criticism of the military in terms of human rights violations, also in terms of there are various reports of the Nigerian military itself raping women who were earlier held by Boko Haram. There's also the issue of how Muhammad Yusuf was assassinated in police custody. So do you think all of these issues also feed into the Boko Haram narrative in terms of recruiting people?
Absolutely. These grievances and violations by security forces absolutely fit into Boko Haram's narratives, but also to their recruitment strategy. A United Nations report published in September 2017 actually finds that 71% of young youth whom they interviewed who joined Boko Haram identified violations by security forces as the tipping point, as the final event that led to their final decision to join Boko Haram. And so you also have issues, other reports showing how young people would say, my sister was raped, or my brother was killed, or my family was raised by security forces, and that's why I joined Boko Haram to take vengeance. But to end the way you started, when we look at the recent attacks in Nigeria, where 47 soldiers were killed, in Chad, where 92 were killed, and also in Mali last week, where 29 were killed, you would see a concerted effort by these groups to exploit and take advantage of the confusion created by the COVID-19 situation around the world. The COVID-19 crisis has shifted the attention of policymakers and governments around the world to this global pandemic. And so what we see are groups around Africa, but also across the world, taking advantage of this shifting attention to launch attacks and also unnamed properties.
Absolutely.
So my message to policymakers and governments is that it is important to fight COVID-19, which is a global crisis, but we must not be detracted from fighting terrorism,
and not give Boko Haram space to do this. But this was very insightful, Mr. Bulama Bukarti. Thank you so much for speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to discuss the situation in Afghanistan, where Islamic State terrorists attacked a Sikh temple. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. We move to Afghanistan, where Afghan forces have killed gunmen who attacked a Sikh religious complex in the capital, Kabul. This ended an hours-long siege that killed 25 people. The Wednesday attack was claimed by ISIS group that operates separately and has also had armed run-ins with the Taliban. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has flown to Doha to meet senior Taliban officials after talks with the Afghan government in Kabul as part of a mission to salvage a short-lived peace agreement. The decision to make the trip, despite the State Department's warning to all Americans to avoid foreign travel, reflects the importance the administration puts on saving the 29th February U.S. Taliban ceasefire agreement, which was meant to lead to talks between Kabul and the Taliban on Afghanistan's future. To discuss the situation, we have with us Mr. Manpreet Singh, who is a representative of the World Sikh Parliament, joins me from London. I also have with me Hamdullah, Hamdard, an analyst based in Kabul, and Rahimullah Yusufzai, resident editor of the News, who joins me from Peshawar. Let me begin with Mr. Singh here. Mr. Singh, before I say anything, my deep condolences on the lives lost in Kabul. The Sikh community, it was a terrorist act that we condemn in all, with all strength. Give me a sense of, because Sikh community is everywhere around the world. So the Sikh Parliament, does it reach out and help people, the Sikh community, when they are in distress?
For yesterday, it was a heartbreaking news that we all had in last in the morning. And to be honest, this is a very atrocious and a heinous crime against the humanity, especially against the Sikh community of the Afghanistan, which has been long persecuted for a long time in Afghanistan. And being a representative from Sikh Parliament, we issued our statement. We had a word with the people in the Kabul, and we were strongly in contact with them if they need anything. Also, our Canadian branch, because in Canada, we've been lobbying for long, to get asylums for the Sikhs of Afghanistan. And obviously, Canada has in the past granted some of the asylums, but our members from the Canadian World Sikh Parliament, they are working on it, trying to get the last 300 families absorbed in. It is really sad, though, because we have Afghanistan, and especially the Kabul, it has some sort of historical significance in Sikh history, in Guruship period. And it's really sad that for a long time, where people over there, they've been helpful to each other, supporting each other. Let's not bring religion into this. I think this is a very heinous crime against the humanity.
I
So this
totally,
needs to be condemned at international
I
level.
totally agree with you. ISIS attacked, as many Muslims, in fact, more Muslims than non-Muslims. But the Sikh community has contributed a lot to wherever they have been, whether in Pakistan, whether in Afghanistan. In fact, as you mentioned, the Afghan Sikhs have been, those families have been there for, a couple of centuries at least, or perhaps more. And it's sad that the Sikh representatives have to try and get asylum for them in other countries. But what is the situation right now? I mean, in terms of, you said that you've been in contact, in terms of the support from the Afghan government for the Sikh community in Kabul?
We completely have faith in the administration of Afghanistan that they will be taking all the necessary steps for the safety and well-being of the Sikh community there. We've been assured by the authorities there as well. But obviously, the situation after the 2018 attack, which killed one of the greatest leaders of the Sikh community in Afghanistan. And after that, we were hoping that the situations will get better, especially after this peace accord between Taliban and the US. But obviously, as we could see, ISIS is still very strong in that area and still able to carry out some attacks, even though it has been wiped out of most of the regions. But to be honest, right now, we are on a very, very sensitive crossroad, thinking what to do, because I don't think so that Sikhs are any more safe in Afghanistan, no matter
Absolutely.
how hard the authorities try to save it. But the situation is not as what we think.
Absolutely. I agree with you. That was one thing. Thank you for speaking with us. Mr. Hamdard, this has been a terrible, it's as I said, it's a very, very small minority, and they've been in Afghanistan for a very long time. Now, Afghanistan, with its meager resources, has had to deal with COVID-19 also, with the Taliban violence also, and now, of course, this ISIS thing also. What is your reading of the situation?
First of all, I'm really sorry to hear about the news of the attack on the Sikh community yesterday. I offer and share my condolences with Manpreet Singh and all the Sikh community in Afghanistan and in the world. We love our Sikh and Hindu homelanders. They are a sample or an example of patriotism, and they're the patriots. They love Afghanistan, they love the Afghans, and they even rejected to go to Canada and accept the Canadian citizenships which were offered to them. We do feel very sorry for the current situation, the attack that ISIL accepted that they had conducted that. I believe that this is a try or an attempt by some intelligences, probably regional intelligence forces, to bring a chaos in Afghanistan and to try to fail the peace negotiation, which will start, the intra-Afghan peace negotiation, which will start between Taliban and the Afghan government sooner. And they are trying to show that after Taliban, there will be the ISIL or ISIS in Afghanistan.
But the ISIS, as I said in my opening, has also had armed run-ins with the Taliban factions. I mean, in Nangarhar, elsewhere, the Taliban have fought the ISIS cadres. But stay with me, Mr. Hamdard. Let me pull in Rahimullah Yusufzai. Mr. Yusufzai, what is your reading of the situation? Quickly, before we move on to the talks in Doha with reference to the ceasefire.
I think there are some good news as well. Because now, finally, Taliban and the Afghan government, with the assistance of Qatar and the US and the ICRC, have agreed to begin the release of prisoners. So that will begin on 31st of March. And, this is, I think, a step forward. This agreement happened because there was a virtual, video conference in which the Afghan government officials and Taliban took part. So I think that is something which may lead to the exchange of prisoners, the numbers which were agreed, 6,000, 5,000 Taliban and 1,000 government prisoners. And then hopefully the intra-Afghan dialogue will begin. The Afghan government has finally announced a 20-member delegation to negotiate with the Taliban. And the people who have been named include 5 women and also representatives from the parties or personalities who are opposed to Ashraf Ghani. So that, I think, makes it a bit inclusive. We don't know how the opposition, Dr. Abdullah, Abdul Rashid Dostum, Muhakkik, will react. But Dostum's son, Batur Dostum, is part of this negotiating team, and so are people from Muhakkik's party. So let's see how it goes.
That's a very interesting point. That's a very interesting point you raised, Mr. Yusufzai. Let me go back to Mr. Hamdard there. Mr. Hamdard, given the political rivalry between Mr. Ghani, President Ghani, and Mr. Abdullah, do you think there's any possibility of sort of, them getting onto the same page with reference to these talks?
I believe that Dr. Abdullah will finally accept and will accept the offer of President Ghani. President Ghani has offered him to play an active and key role in the peace negotiating process. So far, Dr. Abdullah has rejected that, and he is trying to ask for a position as the, we can say like a prime minister or like chief of ministers.
He's trying to strengthen his negotiating hand?
Exactly. He is trying to bring some more pressure on Dr. Ghani so that he can gain more. But I guess there will be no more to be offered to him. However, his team will be included. For example, son or daughter of Abdul Rashid Dostum, or same family members or party members of Muhakkik and Khalili, and those people will be included in the cabinet. This is what President Ashraf Ghani has promised. But they will not be offered with sharing of the power in the next government. I mean, with this current in this current government. However, they can play a key role in the peace negotiation process. As Mr. Yusufzai also pointed out, that son of Abdul Rashid Dostum, Mr. Batur Dostum, and other members who are in opposition with the President Ghani, they are part of the negotiating team. And this is a very inclusive negotiating team, and we hopefully look for successful negotiation with the Taliban. Probably the Doha process will start again, and they will have a second round of peace talks. And their top agenda, as we know, it is the release of the prisoners. We hope the Taliban in the Afghan government will reach an agreement. If they release the prisoners of each other, I believe the second round or the third round will go on successfully, and finally the peace talks will have a result.
Okay. Mr. Yusufzai, before I segment, it seems that Mr. Hamdard also sort of shares your sense of cautious optimism. But there is the ISIS threat. And as I said in my opening also, the Taliban have also been fighting the ISIS cadres. So it seems that there is even more urgency in terms of the Taliban and the Kabul government reaching some kind of agreement in order for Afghanistan to actually fight this ISIS threat.
I think the IS is becoming a big spoiler. They believe that if there is a peace process, they will be the biggest losers, because then Taliban will be free and the Afghan government will be free to fight the IS instead of fighting against each other, and that will be something which they don't want. So they will make every effort. They have been targeting the Sikhs in the past as well. The attack in Jalalabad, which was mentioned earlier, was also claimed by the ISIS, and now the attack in Kabul against the Sikhs. So that also is claimed by the ISIS. And then they have also been targeting the Shias, Afghan Shias, Hazaras. So that actually, is a trademark kind of attacks, signature kind of attacks. But I am still surprised that the ISIS has suffered a lot. They have been, punished a lot, not only by the Americans through their drone strikes or by the Afghan government, but also by Taliban. And Taliban actually, in fact, were able to defeat them in northern Afghanistan and in Zabul province in the southwest and also in Nangarhar. So I'm surprised if they are still that strong that they can carry out these kind of attacks. These require suicide bombers. And you only can have suicide bombers when people are with the group with a lot of commitment. So that is something, we have to find out.
That is something that needs that.
Who is giving them money or?
Absolutely. I think that's a very important point. But we've run out of time. Thank you, Mr. Hamdullah Hamdard. Thank you also to Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai. This is all for tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Meanwhile, for latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.